welcome to The Art of Being Human. We've been talking about drugs. I've been dealing with drugs for the last several segments, and I'm going to continue to do that because we have a very terrible drug problem in this country. And one of the drugs that's being used the most is heroin. And so I'm not going to deal with heroin right now, but I'm going to deal with all of the drugs, the hard drugs, and we also have other kinds of addictions too. There are addictions to the internet, addictions to gambling, addictions to sex. There's all kinds of addictions. I want to get into all of it because the addiction problem is so bad. So I want to start out first in terms of the most common addictions that we deal with in this country, and for that I'll start using these charts right here. And I'll start off with alcohol. Alcohol is one of the most common addictions that we have. It is a drug. It's called a drug. It's classed as a drug. It does all kinds of damage to people. And for alcohol addictions, there are 18.7 million people dependent upon alcohol. And that's 7.7% of our population. 12,000 more people use it daily for the first time. So you can say that every day, 12,000 people use alcohol for the first time. And so many of those will become addicted. AA, it has, Alcoholics Anonymous has 2 million members, and they do a wonderful job. They do an excellent job in helping people who are addicted. Unfortunately, they help only a small percentage of the people that are in need. There are a lot more people who need Alcoholics Anonymous than what actually go. This is just kind of a thumbnail sketch I'm giving you now. Tobacco is a drug also. 71.5 million people use tobacco. That's 23.4% men and 18.5% women. And 44.3% are ages 18 to 25 that use it. So tobacco is very, very hard to get off from. It is a drug, and it's hard to get off from it, and people who do try to get off from tobacco usually end up by really having to fight the fight to win over that, because there's something that drags you right back into it again. So going on from this, caffeine. Now, I'm not suggesting that anybody give up their morning cup of cocoa or their morning cup of coffee, but caffeine is also listed as a drug. If you if you look at any of the list of drugs in textbooks, caffeine is always listed. Caffeine, 80 to 90% of us use caffeine, usually from coffee and soda. However, other things have caffeine in them as well, and many, many people just can't go without their morning cup. And I'm not saying that it's necessarily bad to use caffeine, but it does have a drug effect. 1 cup of coffee has 100 milligrams of caffeine in it, and it can lead to physical dependence, and 40 to 70% of people who try to get off caffeine and not use it at all actually end up by having withdrawal symptoms. So caffeine is something you have to be careful of. Everybody uses it. Many people use it, and I'm not saying that it's going to make you drunk and it's going to impair your driving skills or anything like that. But it does have an effect on the brain. And people who drink coffee or drink soda that has a lot of caffeine can sometimes get really wired up. And to get off from it, they can go through withdrawal symptoms. Now, for drugs, and we're much more concerned about drugs, and I'm not talking here about a specific drug, but just drugs in general, 3.6 million people are dependent on drugs, and 23.4% of them are men. 8,000 people tried drugs for the first time each day. So you would wonder what would attract them. Sometimes it's just curiosity, sometimes people just fall into it, but they use the drug 8,000 every day for the first time. And then marijuana and cocaine are the most often used drugs, and there are 700,000 people being treated for drug dependence and drug addiction. So that's a lot of people. There is, as I said before, no really safe drug. It just doesn't exist. Other addictions, food. 4 million people are addicted to food. I knew somebody who was addicted to lettuce. How can you get addicted to lettuce? But they had to have lettuce. They would go into their office and they had a stash of lettuce in the cupboards and so forth, and small refrigerators. And what they would do is every so often they had to have their lettuce. Now, if you're going to be addicted to anything, I can't think of anything that's safer than lettuce, but there was an actual, probably an emotional, a psychological dependence on lettuce for some reason. I don't know why it would be, but there is people who are addicted to lettuce. You can be addicted to anything, I think, if you use it enough and you get used to it and it fills a need in you. You can just get addicted to almost anything. But what we're mainly concerned about are the really hard physical addictions: cocaine, heroin, marijuana, which is not classed as a hard drug, but you can have some bad experiences with it and you can be really impaired on it. And even e-cigarettes now are causing a problem. I'll get into that. Food, 4 million people addicted to food, 2 million people addicted to gambling, and I'm going to be doing a special segment on gambling addiction as time goes on. There are 1 in 20 people addicted to shopping. They're compulsive shoppers. They have to shop. They want to shop. It gives them a rush to shop, and some of them spend tons and tons and tons of money just buying things. However, at the same time, there are people who just are satisfied to go into a store and pick up something. It doesn't have to be expensive, but the fact is they want to shop. They want to be out. They want to buy things, and I think that it fulfills a need in them. I had a friend of mine who was kind of addicted to shopping. We took her in. She was an elderly person, and so she lived with my mother and myself until the time that she passed on from cancer. And she was elderly, and her home life wasn't happy, and her husband was somehow abusive. She split from her husband. We took her in, as I said, but she had to have things. I think there was an emotional need. She felt like she didn't have that need filled. She needed to have something filled. She needed love and she needed attention. She wasn't getting it so much from her family or her husband. So what she did was she bought things, and for a while that helped her to feel better about herself. She must have had 15 to 20 credit cards. It was an unbelievable number. And when she'd max one out, she'd go ahead and she'd buy something else on another card. Pretty soon, she had about 20 credit cards all maxed out. But she had to buy, and temporarily it gave her a lift. Well, I suppose using any kind of drug temporarily gives you a lift, and that's partly how the addiction starts to begin with. She truly was addicted to shopping. And it was a problem for her family as well, especially after she passed on. And there were all of these credit cards to pay off. And she told me once, she says, if I die, I don't care how much debt I leave behind. My family hasn't been that attentive to me. Let them pay for it. So I think there was a little element of, I'm going to get back at you. You haven't treated me well. I'm going to get back at you. And that's not the best motivation either. She should have probably just stopped using the credit cards, but she bought and bought and bought, and for her that was a very satisfying experience. There are 16 million people that are sex addicted, and it's very much linked to abuse. It's the least understood of all the addictions, and some people say it doesn't even exist. However, most practitioners do agree that there is such a thing as sex addicted people, and if you treat them, you know for sure that it exists. There are people who are addicted to using the internet. They can't stay off their tablets, they can't stay off certain websites, and that leads them into trouble. Sometimes it's pornographic, sometimes not, but they're always on the internet. That can become an addiction too. So we have all kinds of things that we can become addicted to. Not all of them are physical addictions in the terms of you're taking something into your body as a drug, but it has the same psychological effect. There's a need there, and that need becomes filled either with drugs or with alcohol, which is a drug, of course, or shopping or gambling or whatever it is. Now, energy drinks. I'm not talking about this so much as an addiction, but I just want to get into it. I want to get into some of the newer drugs that people are talking about, just to kind of review it. Energy drinks, some of them last for 4 hours, and they contain a lot of caffeine and a lot of vitamin B. Now, you wouldn't think that would be a problem. I went into a store, just to tell you a little story about myself. I went into a store that's not far from where I live. And I was looking, they had the 4-hour energy drinks, and I'd heard about them, and I wondered what was in them. So I picked one up, and I decided to look at it. I didn't see anything in it. There are vitamins in it, there's caffeine in it. I didn't see anything about drugs in it outside of the caffeine, which is listed as a drug. But I just thought, well, there's nothing to this. How could it hurt you? Maybe it doesn't hurt you. Maybe it's a quick way to get 4 hours of energy. And I wasn't really prepared to buy it because I wasn't sure that I wanted to, but at the same time I was curious about it. And just as I'm looking at it, the person behind the desk, who was the salesperson, came over to me and said, "Don't buy it." And I thought that was very honest of him, and so I asked him why. He says, "It will rev up your heart so much. If you have any kind of heart problems," and of course I do, "it is very, very bad for your heart." And I didn't buy it just on that basis, because I do have cardiac problems. But later on and more recently, I found out that some people who use the energy drinks have been having heart attacks. Some of the symptoms of use that you have a problem with if you use these energy drinks, the heart rate increases dramatically, and you can have heart problems. You can even have heart attacks if you use too much of it. So just a word of warning, if you're using energy drinks, that you can have a problem with it if you have cardiac problems or if you use it too much. Okay, here is some new drugs that people are getting allergic to or addicted to. Moon rocks. Now, moon rocks, sometimes called other names such as sassafras, it feels like ecstasy. Now, what is ecstasy? We hear about ecstasy and how bad a drug it is. Ecstasy is a synthetic form of amphetamine, very strong. Amphetamine does terrible things to you. This can be classed as a hallucinogen, sometimes called MDMA. And the symptoms of having ecstasy are the symptoms that you would have if you took the moon rocks, because it's kind of a form of it. You can get paranoia, hallucinations, agitation, increased energy, and liver failure. And one thing you really don't want is liver failure. And one of the problems that people have who take acetaminophen, which is a medication in Tylenol, that's pretty lame. You know, I would think that would be a pretty tame drug. But if you take too much acetaminophen, you can go into acute liver failure. And that's one thing you really don't want to have. That can be a killer right there. A lot of the people, and this is what I want to concentrate, I'll get into heroin in a bit. This is what I want to concentrate on. A new drug called Zohydro-ER. It is a pain, you've heard of the painkiller hydrocodone, but it is without acetaminophen. It's a painkiller without the acetaminophen. So it's much stronger than the acetaminophen. Acetaminophen, if you take more than 6 pills a day, whatever the dose is, I think it's 6 pills a day, 2 pills every 6 hours, something like that, it can cause acute liver failure. So what they've done is to make a painkiller that is so strong, and it doesn't have acetaminophen in it, so you don't have that complication. But this is so strong that if a child takes it, 1 pill can kill them. I don't know exactly what it does. I think it should only be used under a medical supervision in a hospital setting, because if a child gets into it, it possibly can kill them. There is another drug. It's called naloxone Norcan. Now, this is handy because it reverses the effects of heroin, and it's used by EMTs, and they are the only people to use it. Medical personnel are the only people to use it. But if a person was taking heroin and getting the symptoms of heroin use, then this drug takes it all away. It's usually only used by medical personnel. Now, I want to mention e-cigarettes, the electronic cigarettes. You think you're safe in using them. A lot of people use electronic cigarettes to help them stop smoking. At least that's the idea of it. Stop smoking, and they don't, if they're breathing out, when they release their breath into the air, they're not releasing any nicotine into the air. And so a lot of places where you're not allowed to smoke, you are allowed to use e-cigarettes. And as I said, a lot of people use them a lot. Every time they want a cigarette, they go for the e-cigarettes, and supposedly it stops you from wanting to smoke. You can get off smoking if you use it. And it's considered to be safe. It helps people to stop smoking, but it turns out it's not as safe as you think, because they do use nicotine. Nicotine does not go out in the air. You're not breathing it out in the air. You're not getting any secondhand smoke if you're breathing around a person who is using an e-cigarette. So that's not the issue. The issue is that it does use a kind of liquid kind of drug in it, a liquefied nicotine, and people do get it in their systems, and if you get enough in your system, you can be poisoned. And a lot of people using e-cigarettes that are using them, you know, I can use it anytime it's safe, are ending up in the emergency rooms of hospitals because they've been poisoned by the nicotine, liquid nicotine in these e-cigarettes. So it's just something to consider in terms of your health. Let me see here. I want to go into a little bit about heroin. Since we've talked about Narcan, which can reverse the effects of heroin, I just want to go into some of the symptoms of heroin, and we're going to get into it more in depth later on. Heroin, the signs of use: nodding off, a lack of energy, kind of like in a sleep state almost, slow, slurred speech, the appearance and the change of appearance, as a person is not clean, their appearance changes, shallow breathing, dry mouth, constricted pupils, the eyes become smaller. You just get a constricted pupil. More time is spent sleeping. There is poor school and poor working habits. There's a kind of an apathy, no energy about life. There's withdrawal from friends. The friends may not have any ties to friends. There's a loss of interest in hobbies, and stealing and borrowing money to buy the heroin. Now, the heroin, I understand, is fairly cheap. It's not expensive to buy it. And a lot of people who want to get painkillers, and they're buying painkillers, or what's advertised as painkillers, it is hard to get some of these painkillers. Drug companies are being careful about that. So what drug people will do if they're selling these things, they will add some heroin to the supposed hydrocodone or whatever it is that people think they're getting, and as a result, you not only have the problem with the substance that you think you're taking, but you're getting a heroin addiction at the same time, so that's kind of bad. The items that are used to take drugs, to take heroin, the needles, syringes, burned silver spoons, aluminum foil or gum wrappers with burn marks on them, missing shoelaces where the site of the injection is tied off, and so you can get to the injection site easier, straws that have plastic pipes, straws that have burn marks on them, small plastic pipes with white powder on them, water pipes or other pipes. There is a way that you have to do, things that you have to do to be able to take shots of heroin. I've seen some of it. I'm not going to go into discussing that, but those are the things. There's one lady on television, her son was on heroin, and she said she wondered where all of her silver spoons were going. She was missing silver spoons. She thought, you know, if they went on a picnic, they left them or whatever, and when she checked in her son's room, he had them all. He was using them because he was addicted to heroin, and he needed the silver spoons in order to get the heroin into his system. Now I'm going to close it here because I don't have time to get into anything else. The next time that we meet, I'm going to go into the definitions that I'm going to use as we talk about the drugs. I'm going to go into the drugs individually and get into it in a fairly deep way because of the fact that the drug addictions are so bad. And then I'm going to discuss next time the definitions that I will use to describe some of the symptoms of drug addiction. So we'll do this next time. Please join me then.